She was supposed to protect him, she was supposed to guide him, but instead she crossed a line so disturbing it shattered an entire family forever. This is the horrifying true story of an 18-year-old boy named Damien and the stepmother who betrayed his trust in the worst possible way. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about forbidden attraction or poor judgment. This is about manipulation, psychological control, and the devastating aftermath when someone you trust becomes your worst nightmare. Damien thought Monica was his safe place, his protector, the one person who understood him when the rest of the world felt cold and distant. He was wrong, and by the time he realized the truth, it was already too late. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments. Damien's childhood wasn't easy. He lost his biological mother when he was just 7 years old. A car accident that happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. One moment she was there, kissing him goodnight before heading to the grocery store, and the next she was gone, just like that. His father, Robert, did his best to fill the void, but grief has a way of making people hollow. For 2 years, it was just the two of them in that three-bedroom house on Maple Street, eating frozen dinner in silence, avoiding photographs that still hung on the walls, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Damian became more quiet during those years, more withdrawn. He stopped playing soccer, stopped hanging out with friends from school, stopped being the energetic kid who used to run through the house, singing off-key songs from whatever movie he'd just watched. He was 9 years old and already carrying the weight of loss that most adults couldn't bear. Then Monica entered their life like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. She was 32, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that make you feel instantly comfortable. She met Robert at a grief support group, both of them trying to piece their life back together. Monica had lost her first husband to cancer 3 years earlier and understood the particular loneliness that comes from loving someone who is no longer there. Monica always have time for him, even when Robert was working late at the office, which happened more and more frequently as his career advanced. Monica would be there. They'd watch movie together on the couch. She'd help him with his college application. They'd talk late into the night about his dream and aspirations. She told him he was special, that he was going to do great things, that she believed in him when it felt like nobody else did. This conversation became their routine after dinner, while Robert watched television in the den or worked in his home office. Damien and Monica would sit in the kitchen or on the back porch and just talking about everything and nothing, about his day at school, about the girl he had a crush on but was too nervous to approach, about his fears about the future, and whether he'd get into a good college. Monica listened to all of it with unwavering attention, making him feel like the most important person in the world. Looking back, Damien wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly when things started to shift. It wasn't sudden, wasn't obvious. It was more like a slow tide coming in, so gradual that you don't notice the water rising until you're already in over your head. The conversation became more personal. Monica started sharing details about her own life, her marriage to Robert, things that maybe shouldn't have been shared with a teenage stepson. She'd complain about feeling lonely, about Robert being emotionally distant, about missing the kind of connection she used to have with her late husband. She'd tell Damien that talking to him was the only time she felt truly understood. At first, Damien felt honored by this confidence, felt matured and trusted. He was 16, 17, desperate to be seen as an adult, and here was this beautiful, intelligent woman trusting him like an equal, like someone worth confiding in. The physical boundaries started blurring too, though in ways that seemed innocent at the time. Hug lasted a little longer than they used to. When they sit on the couch watching movie, Monica would rest her head on his shoulder or let her hand linger on his arm. She'll playfully ruffle his hair, straighten his collar, touch his face when she was making a point during their conversations. None of it felt overtly wrong in the moment. It felt affectionate, maternal even. But underneath all, something was changing. Damien started feeling confused by his own reaction. He'd catch himself thinking about Monica in ways that made him feel guilty and ashamed. He'd notice things he shouldn't notice, feel things he shouldn't feel. He told himself it was normal, just part of growing up, hormones and adolescent confusion. He told himself Monica was just being kind, just being the supportive stepmother she'd always been. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, he knew something wasn't right. He just didn't have the word or the understanding to name it. By the time Damien turned 18, the dynamic between them had shifted into something unrecognizable from where it had started. The late-night conversation became even more intimate. Monica would talk about her marriage in ways that made Damien deeply uncomfortable, about things that were missing, about needs that weren't being met. She'd ask him questions about his relationship, about his experiences with girls, questions that felt invasive and inappropriate, but that he would answer anyway because refusing felt rude, felt like betrayal. She made comment about his appearance, how handsome he'd become, how any girl would be lucky to have him, how mature he seemed compared to other boys his age. This compliment should have felt good, should have boosted his confidence. Instead, they made him feel trapped, like he was walking on eggshell in his own home, never quite sure what was appropriate anymore and what crossed a line. Whenever Damien felt lost, confused, or overwhelmed, Monica was the one he ran to. She listened, she comforted, she advised, and slowly the line began to blur. What had started as genuine maternal care had transformed into something else entirely, something neither of them was willing to acknowledge out loud. Damien was caught in a web he didn't understand, loyalty and guilt and confusion, all tangled together until he couldn't separate one feeling from another. He loved Monica, genuinely loved her as the mother figure who'd helped raise him, who'd been there when he needed someone most. But that love had become complicated, twisted into something that made him feel sick when he thought about it too hard. So he tried not to think about it at all. He tried to pretend everything was normal, that the growing tension between them was all in his head, that he was imagining the way things had changed. But you can only pretend for so long before reality forces its way in. The spring of Damien's senior year in high school brought changes that everyone attributed to normal teenage development, but that carried darker tone nobody wanted to see. Robert was busier than ever with work, traveling for conferences, staying late at the office, consumed with a major project that demanded all his attention. He'd leave for work before Damien woke up and often wouldn't come home until after dinner. On weekend, he was glued to his laptop, apologizing absently for missing Damien's track meets or award ceremonies. The distance between father and son grew, not out of malice but out of simple absence. Robert wasn't there, and Monica filled every gap he left behind. She was always present, always available, always ready to talk or help or just be there. It should have been comforting. Instead, it started feeling suffocating. The conversation between Monica and Damien continued to deepen in ways that made him increasingly uncomfortable. She'd wait up for him when he come home from hanging out with friends, sitting in the dark living room like she'd been waiting all evening just to see him. She'd ask detailed questions about where he'd been, who he'd been with, whether he'd talked to any girls. The question felt possessive, jealous even, though Damien tried to dismiss that thought as paranoid. When he mentioned a girl from his calculus class that he thought was cute, Monica's whole demeanor changed. She became cold, dismissive, making subtle comments about how the girl probably wasn't good enough for him, how she'd likely just hurt him in the end, how he deserved someone who truly appreciated him. The message was clear even if unspoken. Nobody else would understand him the way she did. The physical closeness escalated in increments so small that Damien couldn't point to any moment and say this is when it became wrong. It was a gradual progression that felt inevitable in retrospect, but recognizable in the moment. Monica started coming to his room more often, usually late at night when Robert was already asleep. She'd knock softly and then enter before he could respond, sitting on the edge of his bed to talk. She'd say, "Just checking up on you," but she'll stay for hours, and her hand will rest on his leg while they spoke, her fingers tracing absent patterns that make his skin prickles with confusion and shame. She'd lean in close when making a point, close enough that he could smell her perfume, close enough to make his heart race in ways that terrified him. One night in March, about a month before his 18th birthday, Monica came to his room crying. Robert had forgotten their anniversary, had been too busy with work to even acknowledge it, and she was devastated. Damian didn't know what to do except listen, except try to comfort her the way she'd comforted him so many times before. She sat on his bed and cried into his shoulder, and he held her awkwardly, patting her back and murmuring a reassurance he didn't really believe. "I don't know why I even stayed," she whispered against his neck. "He doesn't see me anymore, but you see me, don't you, Damian? You understand me?" The way she said it made something in his stomach twist. He tried to pull away, tried to create some distance, but she held on tighter, her tears soaking through his t-shirt, her breath warmed against his skin. That night marked a turning point, though Damian wouldn't recognize it until much later. After that, Monica's visit to his room became almost nightly. She'd complain about Robert, about her loneliness, about how Damian was the only person who made her feel valued. She would touch him more freely, more confidently, running her finger through his hair, tracing the line of his jaw, holding his hand while they talked. Damian felt paralyzed by it all, trapped between loyalty he felt towards this woman who'd been so good to him, and the growing awareness that something was deeply wrong with what was happening. He wanted to tell someone, wanted to ask for help, but how could he explain this? Who would believe him? Monica hadn't done anything explicitly wrong, nothing he could point to as proof. It was all subtle, all deniable, all wrapped up in the language of care and concern, and part of him, the part he was most ashamed of, didn't want it to stop. Damian didn't understand what was happening, not really. He thought it was normal, or at least he told himself it was normal because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. This was Monica, the woman who'd raised him, who'd been there, nothing but kind and supportive for years. She wouldn't do anything to hurt him. She was just lonely, just reaching out for connection in a difficult time. That's what he told himself on repeat, a mantra designed to quiet the voice in his head that kept screaming that something was very, very wrong. He was 18 now, technically an adult, so maybe this was just what adult relationship look like. Maybe this confusion and guilt and excitement all mixed together was just part of growing up. He had no frame of reference, no one to ask, no way to know that what was happening to him had a name: grooming, manipulation, abuse. He didn't have those words yet. All he had was just this growing certainty that he was in over his head and no idea how to get out. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Shortly after Damian turned 18 in April, everything changed. He'd been accepted to a state university about 2 hours away, planning to start in the fall. He was excited about the prospect of leaving home, of getting some distance, of maybe finally figuring out who he was without the constant presence of Monica's attention. He'd started making plans, looking at dorm rooms online, connecting with his future roommate on social media. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe, like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. But Monica seemed to sense his growing independence, and she didn't like it. She became more clingy, more demanding of his time and attention. She'd cry when he talked about college, saying that she couldn't bear the thought of him leaving, that he was the only good thing in her life. One late night in May, Robert was out of town for a business conference. He'd been gone for 3 days, and Monica and Damian were all alone in the house. Damian had planned to spend the evening with friends, but Monica begged him to stay home, said she was feeling anxious and depressed, and just needed a company. Guilt won out over his own desire, as it always did, and he agreed to stay. They ordered pizza, watched a movie, fell into the familiar pattern they'd established over the years, but this time felt different. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken tension. Monica was drinking wine more than usual, and her inhibitions seemed to lower with each glass. She moved closer to him on the couch, rested her head on his shoulder, took his hand in hers. What happened that night would change both of their lives forever. The boundaries that had been eroding for months finally dissolved completely. Monica kissed him, and Damian, confused and overwhelmed and lacking any framework for how to respond, didn't stop her. What followed was a betrayal of trust, so complete, so fundamental, that Damian would spend years trying to understand it. The next morning, Damian woke up feeling like his entire world had collapsed. Shame consumed him, guilt so profound it made him physically ill. He couldn't look at himself in the mirror, couldn't bear to see his own reflection. What had he done? What had they done? Monica found him in the bathroom, pale and shaking, and pulled him into her arms. She told him it was okay, that this was natural, that they shared something special that other people wouldn't understand. She made him promise not to tell anyone, especially not Robert. Think about what it would do to him, she whispered. Think about what it would do to our family. You don't want to destroy everything, do you? Damian, drowning in confusion and self-loathing, promised he would keep the secret, he would protect the family, he would pretend it never happened. But it did happen again and again over the next several weeks. Whenever Robert was at work or traveling, Monica would come to Damian, and Damian, trapped in a psychological prison of guilt and obligation and twisted affection, couldn't find the strength to say no. He felt like he'd become complicit in something terrible, like he'd crossed a line that made him just as guilty as Monica. He stopped hanging out with friends, stopped making plans for the future, stopped caring about anything except getting through each day without falling apart. He started having panic attack, waking up in middle of the night, unable to breathe, convinced he was going to hell for what he'd done. But he couldn't tell anyone. He'd made the promise, and breaking that promise would destroy everything. In late July, about 2 weeks before Damian was supposed to leave for college, Monica came to him with the news that would shatter whatever remained of his world. She was pregnant. She'd taken 3 tests, all positive. She said it in the same tone someone might use to announce what they were making for dinner, calm and matter of fact, like this was just another problem to solve together. Damian felt the floor drop out from under him. Pregnant, the word echoed in his head, refused to make sense. How could this be happening? How had they let it get this far?